This is a lot bigger than we expected as we get major reports revealing that Thatcher Demko's time with Vancouver may be coming to the end as multiple general managers have reached out to the Canucks on the possibility of a trade. We're going to break all this down and more later on this episode. Before we start, I just want to say if you're enjoying this, make sure to go and hit that subscribe button. But with that, let's just hop straight into this. We're on Sportsnet 650 today. We did see them go into and just talk about Thatcher Demko when Dolly did join the podcast. Now, Canucks Summary, shout out to Canucks Summary. I'll link both the podcast and this down below. But Canucks Summary did summarize this podcast and said, can't sign Demko long-term due to his injury history, is expected to practice in 2 weeks, has been injured 4 times in the last year, doesn't know what the Canucks will do with them. Now, before we dive into the second half of this, just looking at Thatcher Demko, we know he does have this year and next year left on his contract, a $5 million AAV contract. Thatcher will be 30 years old at the end of this deal. The biggest thing with this is we know they just signed Kevin Lankinen to his massive 5-year extension. So looking at the fact the Canucks don't know what to do with him, they're looking at his 4 injuries in the last year. What's your thoughts on this just coming out on Demko, Griffin?
Well, we just talked about Brock Boeser and how hard it would be to re-sign him. There's $5 million extra that we can get right there to go and sign him because unfortunately, as great as Thatcher Demko is, Vezina finalist last year, he's been fantastic. He's been just as fantastic as much as he's been injured for this team. He has been a Band-Aid, and I hate saying that just because of how good he's been. You look at his stats, the numbers speak for itself. This year, it's been a little bit of tough sledding, but he's still been battling that nagging injury from last year that was so rare that doctors took so long to even diagnose. Then going into this year, he had even more injuries piled up on top of that. And then a new one now where he is week to week, won't practice in 2 weeks by what Dolly is saying. Very concerning on that front. However, now that we've re-signed Lankinen, this couldn't have come at a better time just because of what Thatcher Demko is unfortunately going through right now. So this is a situation where Canucks do have to move on from him. Kevin Lankinen becomes our number 1 goalie. Archer Shelovs is a number 2. I don't say number 1B because he hasn't reached that status yet. Archer Shelovs as a number 2. Or you go out and get a guy in free agency where Kevin Lankinen was that guy. They went out and got him $875,000. He came in and now he's getting paid 4.5. Who's to say Vancouver can't go and find another goalie like that they can bring in on a very cheap deal at $1 million or under, and then with the opportunity to have him on a prove-it deal or a short-term deal where they can extend him to have a longer-term deal and lock him down. And yes, as great as another team would be to have Thatcher Demko, they would be taking on the history of injuries that come along with it, and unfortunately not much longevity in that as a result. Now, the flip side of that, like we talked about with Boeser, if Demko leaves, goes to another team, wins the Stanley Cup, we're going to be kicking ourselves in the butt. But if Demko does leave and he is another reoccurring injuries, one after another, we dodged a bullet and we were able to re-sign Lankinen and have him locked down. So it's a very much a catch-22. It's a tough 50-50 for the Canucks to do here. However, I do think they're going to lean more on making sure that they go with the healthier choice and move on from Thatcher Demko, who might be more injury prone.
And I mean, the biggest thing is looking at Demko, he has been phenomenal when healthy for the Vancouver Canucks. We've seen him as a runner-up for the Vezina, losing to Connor Hellebuyck last season, but 35 wins, 14 losses, a .918 save percentage. When Demko is healthy, he is a top 3 goaltender in the National Hockey League, and I'll stand on that. I will stand on that hill that this guy is one of the best. But the biggest problem is just the consistent injuries for a guy that's going to be 30 at the end of this deal. Like you've seen from this, he's still out for 2 weeks. He'll start practicing in 2 weeks. 4 injuries in less than a year. If you work your way down, we'll probably hear his name pop up in trade rumors. The Hurricanes inquired about Demko. The Canucks didn't bring them up. So they did call on Thatcher Demko. So we don't know if Jim Rutherford or if Patrik Allvin has been shopping him, but we know teams are calling. Getting soft tissue injuries, there are people that will not write off Demko, and I'm one of those guys. I do think Demko is still elite in this league, but like we're talking about, we did see Kevin Lankinen sign this 5-year extension at $4.5 million AAV, which is a huge upgrade on what he was getting paid, the $875K coming into the season. But looking at the Canucks' current goaltenders, with Demko out, we do see Shelovs join the Canucks. He is on a 2-year deal, $850K. Once next year hits, we'll see Lankinen's 4.5 kick in, But Thatcher Demko and Kevin Lankinen making just $9.5 million next season combined will be one of, if not the best priced goalie tandems in the National Hockey League. And especially if Lankinen and Demko are fully healthy on their A game, you have two guys that can be starting goaltenders. Now, Shilovs obviously hasn't looked outstanding this year, looking great with Abbotsford. But just looking at this, Griffin, do you think they could maybe use this cap space to go out and maybe sign Brock Boeser, maybe to sign a backup goaltender, take a chance? My biggest problem is you don't want to move on from Demko. Like you said, let him go to another team. He fixes his injury problems, wins the Stanley Cup, wins the Vezina. Then you get a little stuck on what to do with this team. But then also, do you take the risk on 2 more years at Thatcher Demko or use that money to upgrade another position?
Well, I think if you ask someone if they had a very beautiful Ferrari, but they could only drive it once a month because the engine kept bottoming out and they had to keep getting it fixed, would you blame them for moving on from that Ferrari? Even though someone else could be able to fix it up and make it prime and back to its full original state again, can you invest in that and keep putting the money into that? Now, if you're able to fix that Ferrari and you have a Corvette sitting right next to it, you got a great garage of cars right there. That's what Vancouver's looking at right now, where Thatcher Demko, he is that Ferrari. What do you do with him? That is very tough to decide, especially when the price tag for both of them is going to be high, but so is the value and what they're worth. They would be one of the best goalie tandems in the NHL. They would be right now if Thatcher Demko was fully healthy. They undoubtedly probably the best goalie tandem in the NHL, bar none, by looking at the numbers. If you had Demko's numbers last year with Kevin Lankinen's numbers this year, there's no argument to even be made. So if they're able to do that, you rest Demko a bit more, almost shut him down this season if you're not moving on from him. That's exactly what I would do. You would have Kevin Lankinen be the 1A, put Thatcher Demko as the 1B goalie. And then as the season kind of goes on, you start to get him back in there more and more. But don't do that until it's near the playoff time. As far as right now is concerned, shut him down at not completely, but very much at a like 85% almost. So he's not getting as many starts. I know Lankinen will wear down, but you do have Archer Shilovs who can kind of get his confidence going back a little bit more as that backup goaltender and let Demko rest a little bit because the playoffs is ultimately what matters most, and that's when you need him for.
And I mean, the biggest thing is they don't need a rush. As we've said, he does have still next year on his contract. They can make a trade right now. They could also just go into next season and ride this entire contract out. Demko can turn things around, and I'm not saying he's not playing well, but he did have a slow start to his season due to injuries. But looking at the Canucks, there is some options in the AHL currently playing. Ty Young, who I did talk about earlier in a video. If you missed that, go check it out. Having the second best save percentage in the ECHL. Ty Young is only 20 years old. He's not ready for NHL games yet. Tolopilo is a guy, and shout out Curtis McKenzie in the comments. I know you love this guy. But looking at Tolopilo as well, you like to see these guys develop a little more. Goalies take a while to make it to the NHL. 24 years old and a 20-year-old. I don't think these guys are ready to make the jump. So I think the best option is hold out on Thatcher Demko. His value could skyrocket. You could go into next year, get a Vezina caliber Demko. If the Canucks struggle and don't make the playoffs again, sure, trade him. But don't move him while value is low. And when you're looking to make this team better and still compete, you need to keep Thatcher Demko. What's your guys' thoughts? Would you move on from Demko? I know I wouldn't. Let us know down in the comments. Why down there? Leave a like, subscribe, share this with your friends. We'll be back with another episode, so keep your eye out. But I've been your host, Mark Pye, with my co-host Griffin, and take care.